building product for tech companies is really hard. It's really hard already. You basically have, you wield an enormous amount of influence. You have a whole team of resources, engineers, designers. They're not cheap. Software takes a really long time. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years to see the results of your work. And you have to ruthlessly prioritize and ruthlessly execute. Building product for non-technical industries is even tougher. You don't share the same language of technology. Most tech companies, like, product is a star. You know, you're the CEO of your product. That's just not true in non-technical industries. They don't care. They can do their job without you. And so through some of my experiences, I've had just to pare down best practices for what it's like to build product for a non-tech industry. So I was, did that work? Okay, so I worked on Hillary's 2016 campaign. Here I am demoing the mobile app for Hillary. I kind of blacked out during the whole experience, and then when I came to every single photo, I was like, why am I raising the roof in every photo? So that's that. So this is kind of to add some color, some context to that experience. That was me my first week of work. The second picture is me, probably my 6th month of work. We'd been working 7 hours a day, 14 hours a day. I think I'm sitting on the floor holding my friend's dog. I was eating a garlic knot, and then I threw the napkin on the floor. So that's what that experience was like. It was incredibly stressful, incredibly stimulating, really heartbreaking. We lived in tech companies, usually you get a lot of perks. We lived in a very resourceless environment. The first day, my boss was like, make sure you bring your own cup to drink water. All the chairs were donated, so people would take the best chair and then put their name on it on a piece of tape so no one would steal it. You see the standing desks there, those are just old boxes we took. And sometimes donors would send food. It was tamale day. I think they just sent frozen boxes of food. I took 12 and I left with them because we never were fed. So that was a huge boon. On the campaign, I was the product lead for the engagement team. So what that means is if you're a supporter and you like us on Facebook, the next thing we ask you to do is go knock on doors and canvas. And that is like jumping on a rocket ship into space. So how can we, as a product team, gradually escalate your level of commitment so that each ask seems more and more reasonable until you know what you can do to help as a supporter? Some of the products that my team built were a digital field office. So we wanted to have everyone to have the chance to feel like what it was to go into a field office. So we made it so you can open a digital field office on your phone, and every day you go in and you do the most impactful actions that you can to support the campaign. Another fun one was Trump Yourself photo filters. We released this during the Republican National Convention. And it was different insults that Trump had said, and you can overlay it over your profile picture and then put it up as a sign of protest against him. So my team kind of did like the fun stuff on the campaign. Oh, that's cool. It's playing. Okay. Okay, so currently I am the product lead for our animation studio at Netflix. And who here is an animation fan? Yeah? Okay, cool. A big empty gap over there. Not sure if you guys just don't like joy. But we started this animation studio about 2 years ago. We have a lot of our creators come in, and they get to work on the production of their dreams. And when they come in, we have them design their own version of the Netflix N. And so I am the domain PM. So I oversee the whole process of how our content makes it to service for animation, we call from pitch to play. And so it's a very complex world. I work with a lot of artists. This is James Baxter. He's our director of character animation. He's the one going like this. He is like an OG animator. He designed Belle in Beauty and the Beast. He animated Belle. That's Jorge Gutierrez, really famous Mexican animation director. He did Book of Life. And so I work with these artists every day. And we approximate about 25% of their time is spent not on the creative complexities of their work, but on things like file management and looking through email. And so a lot of my job is looking at how to reduce that to bring them production joy. So the environment is, again, it's very different from politics, but it's also very chaotic. It's very wacky. It's very much like family. Here, the crew of Centaur World, this animated musical comedy, they're cutting out all of their characters and they like put them up and they dress up as them. There's a wall in which everyone draws on and people sort of troll each other and draw ridiculous caricatures of other artists. And every day we kind of break for lunch the way a production does, and we all eat together. So when I look at my space for animation and building product for animation in particular, I think about both operational, like table stakes things we need to get stuff done, and also innovative products. What is the 2x, the 5x, the 10x that's going to help us make better content and also make more content than ever before? So I divide my world into 4 quadrants, sort of if you look at the studio side and the production side. Studio side is the Netflix side, production side is what it's like to be on a show for Netflix, and then production management side and media management side. Production management would be how you oversee the health of a single show or many shows, and media management is how you sort of send assets to each other. So if a show is ready for someone at Netflix to review, how does that process work? So it's a chaotic world. Like, this is a framework that I've applied to try to make sense of where to start first, but it's, this isn't obvious, and you could probably slice and dice this world 5 other ways. So it's a little bit of my world. So politics and entertainment are quite different, but they share some overlaps. For example, closeness to talent, closeness to candidate is paramount. Information is currency, so people hoard information. Like, transparency is not you don't take transparency for granted. And so there are a lot of challenges to building product in this space where there's huge differences in how people talk and how people think and how people work and what's expected and what the true goal of your work really is. So I'm just going to give a little more context to some of those challenges. So first is this huge cultural divide. For example, at Netflix, half of our company is a very mature streaming company who's built like one of the most impressive technical feats of the world, right? And the other half are people from old studio cultures who come from places where loyalty was everything and relationships were everything. So on the studio side, you have full pipeline. You're making your content. It's all about creation. It's very hierarchical. Legacy culture, mixed culture, unstructured data. People come in with tribal knowledge, with instinct, and that's how a lot of things get done. On the technology side, could not be more different. We're traditionally an end-of-pipeline company, so we received content, we put it on our platform. We're all about ingestion. It's very egalitarian. Everybody has a voice. It's one culture. Even globally, all over the world, Netflix offices feel similar. And we rely a lot on metrics, on structured data, on analytics. And so some of these words you might say to someone on the studio side, and they don't even know what you're talking about. And how do you work together when that's the case? Next, studio culture processes are offline. These are actual examples of how people are still scheduling and budgeting their movies. And so when there's such a disconnect, it results in like a lowest common denominator workflow. Paper, email, phone calls, hard drives. Budgets are real, schedules are real. There's not a lot of time, and they will move on without you, right? If you build them something and it doesn't work, they don't care. They don't have time. They're going to go make their movie. Okay, and then as a good PM, you come into a new space and you're like, do I build or do I buy? Too bad, there's nothing to buy. The shelves are empty. So there's not a lot of stuff out there that you can already learn from, nothing to get you started. It's really just, okay, I have to make sense of this whole very complex world on my own. There's a lot of behavioral change, and I have to decide where to spend my dollars and how to resource technology across the space. And finally, one of the hardest things is the way people look at product. Product is mainly treated as a service. So they're very used to product and sort of IT being the same. We tell you what to do. We know the problems. We know our space. You're a service-oriented team. That's at best. At worst, it's like, my Gmail isn't working. Can you help me troubleshoot? And so there's a real lack of understanding of the value product brings and product rigor and best practices that lead to building great software. Okay, so those are the challenges. And these are some of the lessons I've learned and best practices over my time on the campaign and at Netflix. So first of all, education. Education is paramount. So when I arrived at Netflix, I realized most of our engineers didn't know anything about animation. And so I did a roadshow. I have an animation 101 program that I run engineers through, probably up to 1,500 at this point, and it's the basics of animation, and so that they can appreciate and understand the craft behind this like 100-year-long discipline. For example, most people don't know animation is incredibly labor intensive. It takes a crew of about 250 to 300 people 3 to 5 years to make a feature. The only movies, live action movies, that are similar in terms of cost are Marvel movies, and that's because they're like 90% VFX. An animated movie is 100% VFX. If you take a blade of grass, that blade of grass has been imagined by a visual development artist, modeled by a modeler, textured by a surfacing artist, rigged by a rigger, animated by an effects artist, lit by a lighter, composited by a compositor, and so on. And so all these hands have touched that single asset. On the flip side, you're living in a world that's truly been invented by artists, right? They imagined every blade of grass for you to enjoy. And so you get the sense that it comes from a place of pure artistry, and it's so collaborative. And at the end, I think the product is something that we feel like we could truly lose ourselves in, and that's why a lot of animated properties are really enduring in a way that live action is not. So I come in hot and I do this roadshow to help people appreciate exactly that, like why animation is so hard and why you can't just automate the process. That's probably one of the things I get most in my Q&As afterward. And that's the type of thinking I want to discourage. You can't automate an artistic process, right? And so education really helps set up shared context. These are some stills from Klaus, which was our Christmas movie we released in November by Sergio Pablos, who did Despicable Me. And so here you can kind of see like the process that goes behind making a feature like this. He brought 2D back. 2D, a lot of people thought was dead, but he showed how incredible it can look with a lot of new techniques that were patented just for the film. Okay, next, I go in hot with the other side. With the studio folks, I do product PSAs, and I help them understand why product is a lead, is a partner at the table, and not a service. So we talk a lot about, at Netflix, you're not really doing the job that you did before. You're doing a different job. 20% of your job has to be about scale management if you're a studio exec, or you won't succeed. Technology can help make up that percentage. So at the end of the day, these studio execs, they bring the expertise, product helps bring the scale. And it's only through working together we can do this. Like, no one's ever done this before, and we have to recognize that and learn how to cross-functionally knowledge share and collaborate to do something different. So I talk a lot about the fundamentals of product, and it helps, and I give them examples, so it helps them understand where to lean on us, how we can work together. Okay. That dovetails right into deep cross-functional partnership. So going in, there's all these folks that have been doing what they've been doing for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. They're unable to separate the mechanics of their job from the results of their job, right? And so you have to go in respecting that expertise, that they know what they're doing and that they can continue doing that even without you. And so I found that the best teams are diverse, deep stakeholder involvement. You invest a lot initially in relationship building. You spend a lot of time in discovery. I've been building a recording tool at the animation studio, and so it's only through a lot of trust I'm able to sit in on dozens of recording sessions with my friends who are recording voice talent, right? Like, the stakes are high. If I cough or eat chips during that recording session, like, they can't use that recording. And so there's a lot of trust to welcome me into that space. I spend a lot of time doing discovery, asking questions, asking them about their workflow, what's hard, what they love, before I jump to conclusions and make any assessments about what products we can actually build to help. Also, it's so important to go out and meet your users. On the campaign, we built a lot of tools for people who were canvassing or knocking on doors. And so we went out and we stood in malls and had people sign petitions. We went out in New Hampshire in the winter and knocked on doors and had to wear like gloves and coats. And that helped build so much empathy for the people we were building with and a more nuanced understanding of some of the challenges that we experience that you can't necessarily get from asking questions. Okay, third, Scope your product. So at the end of the day, you're trying to build software to solve problems. So you want to make sure you love your problems, not the solutions. You don't want to fall in love with any of your hypotheses. They're just hypotheses. They're candidates. But if you love your problems, you'll always try to arrive at a better result. So on the campaign, we were very intentional about scoping each person's problem space that they owned. And this changed, this evolved over the course of 18 months. We kept having to change or to split problem spaces, but that was the work. Then you resource each of those problems and you give the teams a lot of autonomy in how they solve those problems. This is so critical. You get really tied to a product having to succeed. And if you think that way, being in this world, it's just, you're not gonna make good things. So making sure you love your problems gives you a more holistic picture of what you're trying to accomplish. Next, once you decide what problem you're gonna tackle, you have to bring along everyone else at the company for the ride, right? It might not be obvious why you're choosing to tackle that problem, so you can use user research and you can use stories to sort of illustrate why you think this is an important problem. So for example, on the campaign, we had an insight, and this was early on the campaign, that about 80% of our email list didn't donate, didn't volunteer, didn't attend events. That's a lot of people who are sitting around on an email list with repeated asks to donate, not doing anything. So I had an insight that maybe they don't know what it is they can do to help. So we did a lot of calls, emails, surveys, and we actually talked to users, and we heard things like, when you're signing up to volunteer, you're screaming into the void. It's really daunting, I know it's important, but I know I don't have the personality to do that. It's terrifying, I'm an introvert, and I don't know what else to do. So these stories really helped illustrate to people who've been in campaigns for a long time that there's a whole body of people that aren't being activated by current campaign asks. And I think a lot of this was a surprise. You know, campaigns have been operating this way in the US for 100 years. And so knowing that there were people out there who actually didn't know what they could do to help, or that campaign asks didn't feel personally targeted, was a really good insight in how we could build something to solve that problem. Next, I come from a gaming background and I'm a big gamer, so I wanted to build a game to address that problem that I just set up. So I had to tell the story with numbers. A lot of people in the campaign had never played games and didn't really gamification has gotten a bad rep. And if you slap the veneer of gaming on something, like, it's not that effective. So we had to really tell this story of why we thought this was a good foundation to ask someone to do the same thing over and over again. So we told the story with numbers. And this was 2015, but 32% of all time in mobile is spent on games, more time than social media. Over 50% of the US population plays games, and they retain users better than anything else except for messaging apps, about 40% retention. So using these statistics and using those stories in parallel really helped sell why we were trying to tackle the space we were trying to, and why our hypotheses are worth a shot. Okay, next. In scoping the problem, you want to pick your marquee audience. So in animation, I decided to build for our story artists and our editors first. And picking your marquee audience is really important. Picking an audience is a luxury, and if you can do it, you will have a better product. A lot of it is improvisational. You want to sort of evaluate who has heat. Is it a place where it's very top down? So if you can convince the leader, if you have a leader that's bought in and you can convince them, they'll get everyone else on their team on board. Or is it there a person on the ground floor who's doing the work who has appetite to use your product? Or is it a person who has a ton of work, and automating some of those processes will save them a lot of time? So make sure you pick your audience and you really focus on your hypotheses within the problem space on what you're going to try first. Next, you have to figure out within your product, what is your core user loop? So in gaming, this is really obvious. When you make a game, you have the player come in, they do a challenge, they get a reward, they spend that reward, and then they get another challenge, right? If you don't have that, you don't have a game. And it's the same for any product. You have to figure out your core loop. We're building a talent database right now at Netflix, and the core loop for anyone sourcing talent is you go on IMDb, you look up talent, whether it's a character designer, whether it's editor, you put it in a spreadsheet, you add some notes, you send that list out, you get notes back. That is a core loop. If my product for talent sourcing doesn't fulfill that core loop, I don't have a product. So it's really, really important to help you figure out where to start is to evaluate your core user loop. Next, you want to make sure that everything you build provides value to the user at any time. So this is like stuffing the brownie with, sorry, this is like stuffing the carrot with a brownie. That metaphor doesn't make sense, but so in this, I really like this image because it shows like when you're building a car, what's considered useful and has utility and brings value is not the top, right? That is a way to build a car. That's not helpful for transportation. Whereas the bottom, when you have this, where you have the skateboard, then the scooter, then the bicycle, then the motorcycle, then the car, there is value in transportation at every step of the way. And that's the same way you want to frame how you build your product. Okay, finally, when you're working with all these very diverse stakeholders, you want to look around the table and look them in the eye and agree what success looks like. Because at the end of the day, nobody knows. They have no idea. And so when we were building our mobile app for the campaign, they were like, this app should make people canvas and they should make people donate. I was like, no. We already have tons of channels for that. What I want to do is activate passive supporters on our campaign into digital actions. Everything else is gravy. I would take it, but it's not the goal, right? And so at the end of the day, when we looked at the metrics for our app, we had about 50% of our app users had never donated, volunteered, or attended an event before using the app. But after using the app, 11% went on to donate and volunteer. That's gravy. I'm very excited about that. That wasn't the core goal, though. 25% of them completed daily challenges. That was what success looked like. I was activating an additional 25% of people to do actions that were going to sit on their couch and not do anything. And 14% were passively using the app, so they were getting information from the app. So you want to be crystal clear about what success looks like. Make sure everybody knows so you can evaluate next steps and what other problems you're going to try to tackle. Finally, product is only half of the equation. There's a lot of spoon feeding when it comes to product that's really rooted in behavioral and operational change. Many of your folks are too busy. They're not gonna, you're fighting for their mind share, right? You're trying to engage with them in a way that you're like, hey, I've built this thing, please take a look and give me feedback. So you wanna make sure your prioritization frameworks are really clear. You wanna have really public release notes. I use emojis, I use screenshots, I use GIFs, I do user guides, I do feedback docs. I do a lot of things that make it so easy for a user who wants to engage on any way, one-to-one, reading a doc, attending a meeting, to learn about the new products that are being released, because you want to meet them where they are. And they have a job to do, and they don't have time, and so you want to make sure it's as easily digestible and as visual as possible. And finally, you want to remember that progress is incremental. These are some of the homepages of Netflix over the years. It takes a long time to build something good. And so you want to move really fast, learn, fail all the time, do hack days, do lab days, and make sure that you celebrate each incremental step, because you're changing an industry that's been doing the same thing for a really long time. And that's a big deal, right? Product is only part of the equation.
I